Back this week, we are talking about the Supreme Court ruling that allowed Donald Trump to stay on the Colorado ballot. It was a 9-0 decision. Um, Maybe not the most important piece of news this week. I think the State of the Union might have trumped it, but I think this is an important topic to cover, and I just want to kind of go into what exactly it means and why. And just to kind of begin, I kind of want to begin with the general like narrative that's been generated around it. Because it's, of course, it was a 9-0 ruling, but there's still a lot of division based off of how people talk about it and how it's interpreted. So I kind of just the general narratives are that, in one corner you have Republican constituency using this unanimous decision ruling as evidence that January 6th and its discussion in politics is largely a political ploy. And the 9-0 ruling is evidence that the whole thing should just be thrown out. And I think that this could, in my opinion, I think this could come back as animosity if the issue is to be addressed again after the election, because it still can be addressed after the election, and I'll get into that and how. On the left, it's kind of seen as largely the result of a Supreme Court that Donald Trump influenced while he was in office by, putting, I think it was 3 different judges on it, since, he nominated several of them, tipped the scale for it conservatively. But I just wanted to jump into a few different pieces of information. In particular, one article from the Washington Post is an opinion piece, so it's not necessarily, it's not objective. It's saying that this is one side. So, but it kind of gives a little bit more nuance to the left, the response from people on the left and the liberal judges, for instance, even though it was a 9-0 decision. So the title of the article, Liberal Justices Rage at the Trump Ballot Decision is Incoherent. So why? Why do they think so? I kind of just highlighted this aspect of it because I think this has been an important part of the conversation. So the liberal justices say that, they ruled against Colorado to avoid a chaotic state-by-state patchwork in the presidential election. So pretty much saying that this was, and this is true, largely the argument was that, we didn't want to make it up for interpretation state by state based off of who can be on the ballot, because that kind of opens up a Pandora's box politically for what each state can do based on the political leanings of that state. But they want to invite continuous post-election court challenges to alleged insurrectionists that would create just as much uncertainty and possibly nullify the votes of millions. As the majority puts it, as the New York University law professor Rick Pilds noted, if a candidate for president is going to be disqualified, the time to do that is before the election, not after he has taken office. Certainly the goal is avoiding chaos. I'll just jump down here. Indeed, the liberal justices' reasoning leaves open the question of why they even joined the conservatives in the ruling against Colorado. They point to federalism principles, which counsel against too much state variation in presidential elections, but the Supreme Court could have created uniformity, or tried to, by ruling that Trump is nationally disqualified as a constitutional matter. That January 6th was an insurrection, that Trump engaged in it, and that the 14th Amendment forecloses him from holding the office. Not one justice went there. So it's pretty much saying, like, this could have been an opportunity for some of the liberal judges to say out loud that this was an insurrection that took place. And I kind of just want to give the counterpoint to that. That comes in this particular, this is a News Nation video from Chris Cuomo, and he interviewed Alan Dershowitz, and he kind of gives a response as to why that doesn't really kind of a response to why didn't the liberal justices, why didn't they step forward and say, okay, January 6th was in fact an insurrection, and this is a good response.
Why doesn't Trump qualify for someone who participated in a rebellion or insurrection against the government for what happened on January 6th?
He might, if there were a process for determining it. If he had due process, if he could have a jury trial, if he could contest it, and if he were found against him, if a process were established by Congress and according to the 3 concurring justices, maybe also by other institutions. But you can't just have a Secretary of State say, I think I'm going to take him off the ballot.
Dershowitz saying here, basically. What he's saying is that this court ruling was a very particular thing, right? It just had to do with the specific amendment in question, right? The 14th Amendment, which Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which actually, which was, enforced during or after the Civil War to prevent people who were from the South and had been a part of the rebellion and the separation of the Southern colony or the Southern states. Um, and and that ultimately what this amendment did in its larger scale, not necessarily just this particular section, but it was a larger amendment. And that amendment actually had a big impact on the power that states and the federal government have. So it shifted power from states to the federal government. And so when it comes to when you're looking into this amendment, you have to say, well, what has more precedent, right? What has more historical precedent? Well, clearly, if this amendment in the first place was done to enhance the power of the federal government, then what the Supreme Court is saying is, well, a decision based on who or who shouldn't be on the ballot should be left to Congress, should be left to, because it's not really particularly clarified who gets to make that decision as to what constitutes an insurrectionist. There's no like obvious answer and like direct answer as to what exactly and who can make that decision. So in the Constitution, whenever that happens, it's usually left to Congress. And so what Dershowitz is saying here is we've known this for a long time that this is the way that the ruling was going to go, because there's no way that you would let some state attorney make this decision that influences an entire federal election. Instead, what you'd have to do, and what still can be done even after the election, is you could have Congress, have a vote. There could be a sort of a trial, and Trump would he would, be brought in front of a jury of peers, and he could, bring a defense and a challenge to that. So kind of the idea is that it can't really be settled. It couldn't have been settled in this particular case, whether or not Trump actually was part of an insurrection. Republicans floating this as some sort of victory, especially Trump. Cuomo brought this up. Trump came out and said, "This is a big win for us, and this is proof that you can't just, keep an opponent off the ballot box because you want to." And Cuomo really lambasted him for saying this because he said, the truth isn't enough for him, right? Like that's not really what this decision was. It really wasn't about the politics of the matter as to why, or there was no decision about January 6th within itself. This was largely a constitutional matter. So him saying that is and that being the larger response from the right is inaccurate and could actually set up even more chaos post-election if there were to be some sort of trial to take place in regards to January 6th, and then for the Supreme Court to revisit this issue. Further context goes, I wanted to bring up The View because no reason in particular, just because I think they had a conversation that it largely encapsulates what the response is from the left to this, and largely it is an agreement that this was the right decision to make. That they kind of exchanged agreement, different interpretations of that, but it really took a turning point at a certain. It shifted about halfway through the video. It shifted towards how can we even still be normalizing Trump as a candidate? And I think that this happens a lot on the left. And I think that this is kind of part of one of the mistakes they've made in covering Trump in the last few years, and that Cuomo pointed out, the move in 2016 by Hillary Clinton to identify Trump supporters as deplorables, right? I mean, whether or not she meant it literally or not, that's kind of the media has kind of categorized Trump supporters with this sort of lens, even though the context around his coming to power, the frustrations that were there had already been there for a large period of time. So just by kind of discounting people, saying, how can we even still be at this place where Trump is even in our politics? Like, how are we even here? Is kind of very revealing of the inability of left-wing media largely to not understand the foundation of those frustrations. Because ultimately, Trump is, if you go back, Trump is really an outgrowth of the financial collapse in 2008, when, on the right you had the Tea Party and on the left you had Occupy Wall Street. And both of those, in their original fashion, their original origin, were populist movements, right? And they were both hijacked pretty soon after by not so populist things, but they very much revealed across party lines that there was a frustration with the system that we have. And Cuomo made a good point. He said, in politics, you can't just go to people and say, well, you shouldn't feel that way. You can't argue against feelings, right? And so I kind of think that that is a little bit how in mainstream media, everything that is covered around Donald Trump kind of just shifts back towards this. How is this even possible? How is he even still here? This guy is so ridiculous, right? But it's what you're doing is you're kind of missing all the frustrations that led up to that, and also the fact that those frustrations, the core institutional frustrations, existed on both ends of the spectrum long before Trump came along. In conclusion, like, I don't think that this decision, it's not that big. It's big for Trump and him being able to stay on the ballot, and for some sort of constitutional legitimacy around that. But for the politics of the matter, this isn't really that important of an issue. But I think the reason that I wanted to talk about it is because I think it highlights this dualism that we have in politics right now, where we look at it like, okay, the right says, well, this is just, evidence that, January 6th and, all of the arguments that it should be preventing him from running again. That's all just, it's obvious. Look, 9-0, all the justices, right and left, said, no, that's not legitimate. And then on the left, you have, kind of this complicated and missing the mark approach to what Trump is representing at this particular time. Like, this wasn't all that surprising of a ruling. I think most lawmakers, or most people with knowledge of how our law works, and like lawyers, kind of saw this coming. But what is kind of up for interpretation, and what makes it interesting, is the politics around it, like everything today. So a pretty, like, an issue that should not be very divisive becomes divisive because, well, everything seems to be divisive today. And why is that? Well, I don't know. I think that's kind of the type of questions I try to raise in these videos. But I just wanted to inform you a little bit more about what's going on, and I don't know. That's just what it is. That's the view from here. Hope y'all have a great weekend.